All right, all right. Welcome to the Sabby Sab Show on Revolutionary Blackout Network. I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. I have a special guest with us tonight. His name is Rick. He's from the Decolonized Buffalo podcast. Rick, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on.
Awesome. So we've been talking a lot about decolonization and what that would look like on this show in particular. I do want to get into that, but first and foremost, what would you say are some of the challenges that Indigenous people are facing in the United States today?
Oh man, there's a big number of challenges. First, there's like poverty. There's like the lack of educational resources. There's a lack of healthcare resources. There is corporations and the U.S. government ravaging our resources with our land. Our environment. We got military occupation of our land, which is all of these things are part of settler colonization. So yeah, there's the topic of missing and murdered Indigenous women as well, which is genocide upon itself.
And in reference to missing and murdered Indigenous women, are these cases just not being investigated by the police, by the local authorities, or are they being investigated, but they haven't found anyone that's responsible for it?
So when it comes to jurisdiction on the reservations, much of the time, it's the jurisdiction is with the federal government. That means whenever a crime like murder happens, the FBI have to get involved. Local police don't have local jurisdictions on the reservations. There's some states that do, but it's the state police, not local police. And also at the same time, tribes can't prosecute non-natives for murder. Right, which that's a problem upon itself. So we have a topic, an issue of the lack of a sovereignty that we should have to prosecute non-natives, and that itself is what makes all these investigations go real slow, because there's a bunch of jurisdiction and bureaucracy on the reservations to find people and charge them of murder.
So you said tribes can't prosecute murderers, then where did that rule come from? I'm curious.
So that goes back to I can't remember the court case right now. I wish I had it in front of me, but it goes back to certain court cases. I think this is why reading about Indigenous history, reading about settler colonization is important. But there's a court case where it states that when a non-native goes on the reservation or Indian land, Indian territory, and commits crimes, that person can only be prosecuted by the U.S. government, and that goes back all the way to like the 1700s. So this it's not a new thing. This is very old. It even goes back to like when British were colonizing the East Coast. So the federal government or the crown always wanted to have power to prosecute its own, because the moment Native people start prosecuting settlers, that becomes a problem, because there was a lot of murders even way back then. Murders of Native people goes back to the time of British colonization.
Wow, unbelievable. I'm curious in reference to the reservations. Some people have said that when we talk about reparations in this country, when we talk about it, I'm speaking for people who are descendants of slavery in this country. Some people have made the argument that Indigenous people do not need reparations because they were given reservations. And I want to get your opinion about that. Do you feel that reservations was enough? Do you feel that indigenous people should have reparations? And if so, what should that look like?
I don't believe that there's a certain amount of money that the U.S. government can give to pay for its, atrocities of colonization within towards the native people. I think that reservations weren't enough. That was part of the treaties. Nowhere in the treaties did it say this is reparations, right? So anybody
Mhm.
that says that the reservations were part of reparations obviously have not read the treaties itself. So I think my point of view, we need to decolonize. We need our land back. Our land back means, or decolonization means, to for us to have a process in the lawmaking process of this land. We need to be the ones in the forefront to make decisions, and create laws that affect us instead of you know uh, these this American government that's founded on genocide and settler colonization. But I think reparations, there's not enough money, and I wouldn't want to accept a certain amount and then let settler colonization continue. That, to me, that's outrageous. We want liberation. We don't want to be paid off.
Interesting points. I do want to hear more about land back because I know that that's been a pretty hot topic over the past couple of years. Some people think that when we talk about land back, we mean just give the United States, give that land back to indigenous people. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
So yeah, when I talk about decolonization, uh, it's strictly on the governance of what it would look like post settler colonialism in the U.S. A lot of people talk about decolonizing themselves. I'm not worried about that because that itself is more about the community. So how the community wants to teach language or teach their culture, it's up to them. So I have no say so in that. But I think when it comes to decolonization, like nationally, is where I come in, and I think in my point of view, there has to be this is what it looks like to me. There has to be a government with representative of one person from each tribe. There's 574 representatives, right? And I also believe that there should be some representatives of within the Black community that were brought here from Africa forcefully, and I think they should have sovereignty as well, right? So there's two communities, the Native and Black communities, that should have sovereignty and should have representation within the decolonial state. Everybody else, if they decide to stay, that's cool. They can stay and become citizens of this decolonial state. It's just like me. I'm citizens of three places. I'm a citizen of the Comanche Nation. I'm a U.S. citizen, and I'm a Mexican citizen, right? So people like me exist, right? So why can we have a state where Native people are citizens of their tribes and citizens of the decolonial state? It's possible, right? It's possible now, So I think why can't we have that? But the thing is, we can't. I do think we should have representations for non-natives, but maybe sometimes they should. Uh, I feel like they need to take a step back at times, right? I feel like they also want to speak for us, or they want to, misinterpret what land back means. I think this is where the misconceptions come in,
Hmm.
where they say, oh, that we're going to take the land and we're going to be some like indigenous bourgeoisie and we're corrupt, or all these nonsense talking points they say. It's obviously because they haven't studied indigenous history. They don't know or understand indigenous sovereignty, and they're not paying attention to Native people when they talk about decolonization.
Well said. Well said. I know when I lived in North Carolina, there was some of the students that went to my high school were a part of the Lumbee tribe
Hmm.
in North Carolina, and that was the first time I had heard of that particular tribe. And I did notice something when I was in high school. They were treated in such a way as though it's difficult to say. It's like they weren't treated the way that Black students were treated in high school, in my school. They weren't treated the way that white students were treated, like in our high school. But there was still like this mentality that, oh, those are the Lumbee. kids. And to me, it was just really weird. I'm like, we're all at the same high school. We're all students. Why do you have to refer to them as, oh, those are those Lumbee kids? I'm like, why do you have to, I guess, separate them like that in such a way? So they, like, people, and by they, I mean a lot of the white students that I went to school with, they still look down on the indigenous students just like they did the black students, but it seemed like it was a little bit different in the sense that
Yeah.
they didn't even consider them to be a US citizen, which is weird because we were all citizens, but they did treat them in a particular way. That is something I noticed.
Yeah, I think there's like one big variable of this country is that the race variable, which the colonizers brought, the settlers brought, and they like to divide us into these little pockets, you know, and it's really rough because I think the Lumbee have it really rough. I think because a lot of them are mixed with black, so they can they get miscategorized or they get the stereotypes. I think, and I think this is why having solidarity with local communities, is important. I think instead of like categorizing the Lumbee, maybe people in that community should try to understand them and build relationships with them to understand their struggles, or just build community, make friends.
Mhm. No, no, I agree. How do you feel about people who, and I'm going to use Elizabeth Warren here as an example. Sorry, but I have to go there.
Yeah.
How do you feel about people like Elizabeth Warren that say that they have Native American ancestry and use it to their advantage to the point where you may be able to get certain types of scholarships if you have that on your application? You may be able to get certain types of jobs if you have that information down. How do you feel about people who say they have Native American ancestry, but it's actually only like maybe like 1.2%?
That's a problem. And actually, I talk on panels specifically on race shifting, right?
Mhm.
And I would recommend people looking up Dr. Kim Tauber, Cersei Sturm, Daryl LaRoe, and all these different scholars that talk about race shifting. This is a problem within not just the U.S. It's in Canada, it's in Mexico, it's globally. Because on the podcast, I've even interviewed people where there was race shifting in the Philippines, right? So I
Mhm.
think this is part of cellular colonization. They want to take our identities to just replace us. And I think same thing with what's her name, Rachel Dolezal, right? And
Yeah.
yeah, so it's a problem. Even though people told her she wasn't black, she still persisted. And
Mhm.
sometimes these race shifters, they they do back away, they apologize, and but there's so much, and it's not just Elizabeth Warren. In Canada and the US, there's been like within the last 2-3 years, there's been a purge of fake natives within academia, right? And
Yep.
I think it's overdue, right? And my point of view is it's a plague. And I think man, I just think people, it's hard because this is something that's very detailed within indigenous issues. And just like we talked about before we went on air, is that the black community and the native community have very similar issues, and race shifting is one of them.
Mhm. I agree. I agree. No, I think also part of the problem is there are people, and I remember hearing this when I was growing up as well. There are people who will just, I don't know where this comes from. A member in the family somewhere will say, "Yeah, we're part Native American." Nobody in the family has any proof of this. No one in the family does any type of research, and they go around seeing that same talking point that someone like Elizabeth Warren did.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think a lot of people do that. I think the most common one is Cherokee. A lot of
Mhm.
people say they're Cherokee, and it's kind of weird. Not a lot of people say they're Comanche, so I don't really deal with that too much. So, but I think, like I said, I think it all comes to community. Like, it's very easy to contact tribal enrollment office and
Mhm.
and verify if somebody's native or not. I think even if you're curious about your family history, you can dig into your past and see if you're native. Especially, I'm not promoting ancestry.com, but there's like other ancestry websites, and you can look into your family tree. But even then, there's a conversation if you have one native ancestor from like 300 years ago, and your family has been living as settlers for 300 years, are you really native? Like, you've been living as a settler for 300 years, right? And I think that's a conversation that's been had within native academia, and people have different opinions. So I'm not trying, say I pick one over the other right now, because it's very detailed and that there's a whole mess of beans open it up. But I think this is a conversation that native people are having. This is why it's important to listen to native scholars.
Well said. I'm curious how you feel about some of the, I guess, the social representation that's happened in the United States. And now there's a lot of name changes that are happening. For example, the sports teams, some of the names like the Cincinnati Reds, obviously the Washington Redskins, they changed their name. And I want to hear from you. Do you feel that it's as disrespectful as I guess you would say some people call them social justice warriors or the culture warriors as they feel that it is? Is it as personal and upsetting to you, or do you feel like this is more of culture war issues that's happening?
No, I think it's pretty personal. I think if a community says they don't want to they don't want or name us offensive on a sports team, I think people should listen. This is something that's not new. This is something that Native people have been frontlining. They've been in the front lines for the name change. It's not, like non-natives heading this campaigns. But there's even like Native communities and Native governments that try to work with sports teams to change the names and then have it, like I think the Seattle Seahawks, if I'm not mistaken, their logo is like native designed or something like that. There's some teams that native communities do work with the teams, and it's not offensive, right? So I don't think it's social justice warriors or anything like that. I think this is a problem we have, because it's not just with the sports teams, it's also with decolonization. So I'm pretty sure it's from the right. And, they say that, whenever we talk about decolonization or these topics, the sports teams, that they say is from the woke left, when Native
Mhm.
people themselves are saying it. So it's not, we're not, I don't understand why they keep saying that Native issues are woke left when we're the ones saying it. So, yeah.
So, since you brought up the concept of woke, I want to get your opinion about. So, we were talking about this on here recently about this whole theory of MAGA communism, and I think I know how you feel about this, but
Yeah.
we were talking about that, and I think sometimes there may be an exaggeration about woke and culture, so to speak, and identity politics. When I talk about identity politics, actually the definition of it, I'm talking about people using certain aspects of their identity to get elected, to get some type of political gain.
Yeah.
But that phrase it's now used for anything. Anytime you mention your race, your gender, or the issues that you go through being a part of that race, now everyone, not everyone, but a lot of people are saying, no, 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 that's identity politics. And there's no politics attached to it. So I think people have been misusing that phrase. And I bring this up because we were going into this whole concept of MAGA communism. And one of the things is, and I know Jackson Hinkle, but one of the things is we're going to focus on the economic issues. And I totally get that. We're going to focus on the class issues, and I get that too. But I think where I start to get concerned is when there's this message. We're not going to talk about race and gender and things like that, because those are woke issues. Those are
Mhm.
identity politics. So I think it's being misused, and I want to get your opinion about that.
So I'm going to talk about MAGA communism in general. So I think, the problem with that is that, people like that abide to these ideas, is that they want to continue settler colonization with a communist aesthetic, right? So one thing about communists is that they use dialectical materialism, where they try to analyze, you know, uh, conditions with different contradictions. So how can they create an analysis without taking into account cellular colonization and our sovereignty? So now they're creating this theory of a MAGA communism without taking into account our sovereignty or decolonial theory. And to me, it's just continuing of cellular colonization, because if we have a communist revolution but we don't frontline decolonial theory or liberation for Black and Native people, right, then really it's just an aesthetic, right? And this, I do want to bring up Hinkle, because he went on RBN and he said he promoted the idea that settlers they become indigenized, right? And to me, that's just a continuation, more continuation of settler colonization, because now they want to take our identity, just like I said before with Elizabeth Warren. So they like to rip on Elizabeth Warren for claiming she's Native, but he's also saying the same thing she is, right? And I think that's dangerous. So not only do they want to, ignore us, but they want to replace us, and that's it's not liberation for us. How can you tell Native people, hey, we're gonna create we're going to be in power after the revolution, and then we're going to be indigenous as well? No, fuck that. Excuse my language. so, so I think yeah. So I don't know if that's your question. If you have like side questions to that.
Yeah, and I want to talk more about this, because I think the piece that some people are missing is that for those of us that are part of those groups, I mean, yeah, I talk about class a lot. I talk about that heavily, but at the same time, not everything that happens to me is a class reason. There are
100%.
times when things happen to me because it's strictly racial.
Yes.
No, nothing about class. And I think it's dangerous if we're going into these silos where we're supposed to just ignore that. We're supposed to pretend that race is not an issue when it is clearly still an issue in this country. So when I say I'm totally fine with joining with people that are a part of different groups to fight for certain issues, I'm talking about certain issues like healthcare, totally, unionization, of course, worker co-ops, absolutely. That being said, that does not mean, and we all have different opinions about this, that does not mean that I am going to ignore or pretend like my race and the problems that I have to deal with as a Black person does not exist.
Exactly.
Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, 100%, and that's exactly, you put it perfectly. I think that's the issue we have with these MAGA communisms, or MAGA communists, whatever they call themselves. I call them settler nationalists, right? Because they believe in the American flag, and they're really angry when their power gets taken away from them from talking about these topics. We're talking about the racism that this country was based on, and how it's still here and it's still driving a lot of politics within the right. So a lot of people think, like especially Hinkle, like that MAGA people are somehow just only driven by class. But like we have to think about when Trump, especially when Obama was elected as president, the number of white supremacist organizations, just the number that grew is just crazy, right? Because they hated that a Black person was president, right? And
Mm.
that tells you that race plays a big part within this country. And it's really sad. I think that these people, the Hinkle, that they dismiss class, they dismiss. I'm not class. I'm sorry. Race. I'm sorry. And I think how can you, not. He's trying to say not to isolate MAGA people, but at the same time, he's isolating everybody else. He's isolating people with different genders. He's isolating uh, the Black community, the Native community, all these different people, just to cater to MAGA people. I would think that recruiting from the right is a bad idea, because what do you want to reform, or like not reform, but refine the people that are already on the left, help them understand even better, right? What maybe they're misguided. But I think at the end of the day, Hinkle's ideology is totally out of whack. So there's nothing he can really do. So, yeah.
So one thing I'll say in reference to Barack Obama, I will say in reference to support, John McCain did not garner anywhere near as much as support as Barack Obama did.
Hmm.
So people did heavily come out to support Barack Obama, and so if we want to look at it that way per se, the question I think that we should ask, why is it that some of those, racist or white supremacist groups felt so much more comfortable coming out and outwardly supporting someone like Donald Trump and not doing that same thing for someone like John McCain?
Hmm. I think because I think John McCain uh, didn't really cater to that demographic as much as Trump did. Like, people were asking Trump to denounce white supremacists, specific ones, and he wouldn't do it. He would like, or what was it, that other organization, but he constantly he would ignore the questions to denounce that demographic of people, the white supremacists, and he wouldn't. John McCain, I think he actually did at one point during a campaign that somebody said like, "Oh, Obama is an Arab," and he took the mic from the lady. He was like, "No, no, he's not. He's a nice
Mm.
person, whatever." So I think that's the difference between John McCain and Donald Trump. I don't like John McCain, but still, like I can still say there's a big difference between those two. And it's rough seeing, and to me it's weird MAGA communists trying to um, uphold Donald Trump. When he is a landlord himself, like how can you be a communist and like put some landlord on a pedestal, right? It's just weird to me.
Agreed, agreed. There's a comment here from Joseph Bett. I thought this was a good comment. Native Americans are one of the most overlooked ethnic groups in the U.S. I've been to Navajo County, and hospitals are really far apart from towns. Can we talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I don't, I'm not Navajo, so I can't really speak on that. But I do know that, like I said earlier in the very beginning, that there is a lack of resources for medical for the Native communities, and it's just rough. I think that this is why I believe in communism. This is why I believe in socialism. I think that we need to give our Native communities better resources, but not just for Native communities, for everybody, right? Have it where everybody has healthcare, everybody has education, and I think it's overdue. We're one of the, least. Our community has the, very bad education on education and health, So yeah.
Is the idea that, and I ask because I've actually never been on a reservation. My parents have. They've been to there's a reservation in North Carolina called Cherokee. So they've been there. But is the idea, I guess, supposed to be that people assume that all of your needs and wants would be taken care of on the reservation?
I don't think so. The reservations were created obviously to contain Native people in a certain area. Um,
Mhm.
they grew smaller over time as the westward expansion. The reservations were created smaller, and also there was allotments. So whenever there was, at first it was communally controlled by Native people, but then after the U.S. government tried to assimilate Native people into
Mhm.
like individuals, because of capitalism and colonization, they gave all Native people a piece of land, and the extra remaining land from those reservations were, obviously the settlers could take. So reservations got smaller from their original size, right? So I think, sorry, my dogs. I think I think that we have to talk about that. But no, I mean there's treaty agreements. For the government has to give resources to Native people, but these agreements are really old. So and that's another conversation. Is that should we renegotiate treaties to fit our
Right.
demands? But here we go again. If we renegotiate treaties, we are trying to, in my opinion, we are justifying further settler colonization and justifying legitimizing the settler states, and we want to liberate ourselves and renegotiating treaties with the settler states, to me, in my opinion, it's not a good idea. Instead, we have to talk about what it looks like after settler colonization. And like I said earlier, these people that are not natives, they could stay here, but we have to talk about how we live together instead of like you know having the settler. How do I say this? There's a concept within the native community and even native law is called the guardian and ward. So the U.S. government considers itself the guardians of native people, yeah, and the tribes as wards, right? And this is a legal thing, right? This was made with Cherokee Nation versus Georgia in 1831. So this is a court case that happened, and we are considered domestic dependent nations, right? So it's our we constantly fight for
Mhm.
sovereignty. We constantly fight for furthering to expand our jurisdictions, but it's hard. And we have gone a long way, but I think we really need to talk about what it looks like after the U.S. government is gone. Because realistically, it's not just because of a revolution. What about economic collapse, right? Just like the Soviet
Right.
Union did. So what if the U.S. government collapses? So most people don't understand that there is a system already in place in the U.S., a decolonial system. So there's 574 different tribal governments. We have our own economies. We have our own programs. We have infrastructure, right? And some of that stuff non-natives also benefit from, right?
Mm.
So when people talk about the vanguard, I always tell people it already exists in this country, right? I will. The one thing I will say is like for the Navajo Nation, they have over 100,000 members in that tribe, right? There is no communist party that's ever existed that has 100,000 people that has had an economy, a
Mhm.
government like they do, and infrastructure. So we know how to manage, right? And people don't realize that we're always like an asterisk to people. We're always second thought to like or not thought about at all. So I think that's another issue.
Yeah, and I think there's stereotypes that go along with that too. I was a college advisor, and I also worked with admissions, and I remember some of the comments that were said about some of the students that came through. Oh, we're giving them a scholarship because they're indigenous. They don't look indigenous to me, and I'm like, well, what does indigenous look like? So I think there's a lot of stereotypes that
Yeah.
are applied to that too, that people have about indigenous people in this country. I blame the media and Hollywood for part of that too. And I want to get
Yeah.
your take about how do you feel that indigenous people are represented in Hollywood? Because I've noticed a lot of stereotypes with that as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of stereotypes. There's a documentary called Real Indians. It's real is REEL Indians, and that's a good documentary about Indians in Hollywood. But I think that's another miscategorization of. I agree with you. So Native people come in all colors. I mean, we married
Mhm.
different types of people. We married black, whites, Asians, and we look different. So you can't really say, hey, like, oh, that person's not as native or because he's white, or that person's not as native because he's black. No, man, it's that doesn't determine if we're native or not. What determines if we're native is our citizenship to our communities, being part of our communities. So like skin color or blood quantum should not exist when it comes to that concept, like the
Yeah.
phenotypes, right? I think people, that this stereotypical image of like a long hair native on a horse, shirtless. To me, it's just really corny. Comanches were plains people, but still, you can't stereotype people, right? I think we that's what's also goes into the whole mascot issue is like the stereotypes that people have, and then it gets even worse when people stereotype in a more negative way, like when it comes to like, oh, native people to just drink or whatever. And that's because that's when we have to tackle all stereotypes, not just the ones that people see that are important. But yeah, I agree with you. I think native people come in all different colors. So I think people need to realize that we are sovereign people, and our indigeneity itself is not based on phenotypes, based on our citizenship and kinship to our communities.
Yes, there's a clip I want to play here. The name of this video is called "How the U.S. Stole Thousands of Native American Children," and it was actually Nico House who actually informed me. about this particular issue. I just want to play a clip from this here. So let me share my screen. And again, this is something that a lot of us were not taught about in history class. So really quick, Rick, have you heard about this story?
Yeah, this story is like not this specific story, but this is boarding schools happened all over the U.S. It happened all over Canada. It happened in Mexico too, right? It happened in Hawaii, so they take Native people, Native children especially, and it's easier for settlers to assimilate the Native children into colonial society through these schools. And these schools were ran by different religious dominations, some by Mormons, some by Catholics, some by Christians, so really it varies by where these schools were at. But some of them, a lot of Native kids died. I mean, we're finding still Native burial grounds on some of these old boarding schools, like massive burial grounds in Canada. And this is just in Canada. So what's going on in the U.S.? And these kids died of diseases, preventable diseases. They were to my point of view, tortured, abused, sexually abused, physically abused, mentally abused, emotionally abused, and this is why it's important for people to know there is a law in place right now, the Indian Child Welfare Act. It's called ICWA, right? And this law is made so when a child without parents or a child, that's parentless, has to go to an Indian or Native parents, foster parents, or the community itself, the tribe itself finds a family for the Indian child, right? But now we have people that are trying to break that law apart, and Native people are fighting to keep ICWA together, and I 100% support ICWA. So I think people should look into that. And I mean, this is just part of colonization, and this is why I think that reparations is not enough. I've known people personally in my own communities and other Native communities that have been to boarding schools. These are people that are now our elders. I met a person that was a little bit older than me, just a couple years old. I'm almost 40, that went to a boarding school himself. So people that these stories, the people that went to these boarding schools are still alive, right? And they have really nasty stories about their experience. I really think that again, this is something that's not spoken to about enough, and these are like atrocities that nobody's paying them money. They're just living their lives within our communities, but they've never got reparations for themselves, not for settler colonization, for their own experience. And to me, that's just, they're being ignored in society.
That's right. That's right. I'm going to play this clip here. This explains a little bit more about this particular issue. And I wanted to pause there because that's also similar to what happened to slaves that were brought to this country from Africa. A similar thing. Names were changed. Your culture was taken away.
I agree. Can I ask you a question? So I know we're talking about what Native, what reparations for, my vision for reparations, decolonization. Can I ask you how do you envision decolonization, so people can, listen to us both?
For me, it's not just about like giving a check, although I think in reference to reparations for slavery and for Jim Crow, I know that is a part of that. Sandy Darity has done phenomenal research on this, explaining like why reparations are needed. So I just kind of look at it as going back to General Sherman's promise, which did not happen. 40 acres and a mule. Well, we don't use mules anymore, but that's transportation. 40 acres, that's land. Land equals wealth. And that's something that for a lot of us that are African Americans in this country, we didn't have generational wealth to pass down. So part of it, I think, should be a cash payment. But the other part of it, I think, is there are certain systemic issues that have to be fixed. I think the public school system needs to be changed. It should not be funded by property taxes. That in itself is racist. And I also think that you have to change the healthcare system. These are a lot of the things that affect like African Americans in this country. So you have to do those systemic changes. It can't just be cash, because I feel like if you just give cash only, we're going to be right back where we started because the systemic issues are still going to be a problem.
100%. So we have two demographics of people saying the same thing, trying to move forward. I think this is what is important within liberation theory. Within this is decolonial theory. Decolonial theory is not just indigenous theory. Decolonial theory is also black decolonial theory, black liberation, right? So I think this is what people, especially these MAGA communists or settler nationalists, they're missing this. They're missing this contradiction, right? So I don't know how more simply to put it other than if I think some people, if they don't understand the colonial theory, should take a step back and start learning
Right.
about these topics. And it's okay to say, hey, I don't know these things. It's fine. It's better for you to say you don't know and you want to learn, rather than say just dismissing the whole concept itself. And I think that's what's happening with some of these settler nationalists, is they're dismissing everything, right? And they're just going, they're becoming class reductionists, right? And they're supporting settler colonization, and they're supporting settler nationalism, and I think they're lost in my point of view. So
And that to me, like based on what I've read, that is the way to close the racial wealth gap. You're not going to close the racial wealth gap by canceling student loan debt, although I support that, but
yeah.
you're not going to close it that way because the majority of African Americans don't have student loan debt. So I think this is something that, I'm going to try to see if I can get Sandy Darity to come on to talk about that because he's been doing research for that for years. And I think a lot of people or some people may be against something like reparations, but when you show them the data and you show them the research, it makes a lot of sense. People think that it's just in reference to slavery. No, we're talking about Jim Crow too.
Yeah. I agree with you, and I think we in the U.S. and in Canada and even Mexico, uh, are very, like I said, very similar settler colonization. Not exactly the same, but very similar traits. How it happened. They brought in black people, from Africa, forced them to be slaves. That happened in Mexico as well. Nope, no, most people don't realize that Mexico had as many black slaves as the U.S. did, right? So that's a history. Black history is not known, and this is, like I said, another
Mhm.
similarity is Native history, Black history, not known as much as they should, and our history should be in the forefront. So people can understand, so we can tackle these issues. Because if people don't know these histories, then they're gonna make a bad analysis, and we're seeing it now on Twitter.
Right.
We're seeing it now, and that's an issue. And I think this is why I made the podcast. And I thank you for letting me speak about these issues. But I think we need to have solidarity within both our communities to move forward and talk about what decolonial theory looks like. Because I can propose what a decolonial government can look like, but I think it's not going to be, my voice is not the say all. I think we all need to have a brainstorm together and build something, and create some kind of like our own manifesto together,
Mhm.
right? And then move forth to that, and then have native government support each, our struggles, having the black community support both our struggles. And then I think I'm optimistic, so, but I think we have people that purposely distort these issues. And I think that these people, yeah, we should. And the reason I talk about people like Hinkle or other settler nationalists is because if we don't tackle what they're saying, they're going to get an audience, and that audience is going to be, their voice is going to be too strong. It's already too strong. Hinkle's audience is way too big in my point of view, right? Or people like him, that Haas, all these people. I think if people listen to our opinions, they will see, hey, man, these people, the settler nationalists, their opinions are wrong, and then they'll see for themselves. So, somebody's grandma, it's just wild to seeing that these that it's hard to see these videos. I just think that um, to me, it's just disturbing that this is why I made the podcast, because like not many people know this history, and I kept repeating myself and repeating myself and repeating myself, and I think like it gets exhausting after a while, right? I can
Mhm.
I can only imagine, what people in the Black community deal with. We're having to repeat themselves at the same time, dealing with all these things, all these issues we deal with in our community, and dealing with settler colonization. And it's just like we are very resilient people.
Yes, 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 indeed. I'm going to finish up with this point here. In 1900, there were about 20,000 Native American children in these schools, and then it goes into by 1925. So let me see. Wow, I put the link to the video to that video there. That's by Vox in the chat. Please check that out. The video is longer, but uh, it's just terrible. Terrible to see that people were taken away from their family. But a lot of people don't know that this happened, and they did not teach this to us in school.
Yeah, it's very disturbing. I think you know all we can do is try to undo settler colonization, and I think this is why it's important to talk about these issues. Hearing the stories of people that are still alive, that have gone through this, and just amplifying their voices in the community, and then talking about what liberation looks like. We cannot imagine a future where we're living under settler colonization forever. To me, it's unacceptable. 100%. I think we need to talk about what decolonial theory is, and it's not blacks or native people oppressing white people. It's not that, how they want to claim. So it's us working together. It's not just decolonial theory, is also class analysis. So we have Marxist theory with it and decolonial theory together. And I like to, say that this is very complex. Native history, current native sovereignty is very complex. I tell people it might take a couple of years for people to catch up, and that's fine as long as you're trying to learn, trying to help other people learn, and I think just because somebody's not native, it doesn't mean you can't advocate for decolonization. I think everybody should be advocating for decolonization, not just native people, right? It should be even white people, right? So I think if somebody calls themselves a Marxist or a communist, they're talking about liberation. But what does it mean if you're not liberating, native people and black people from settler colonization?
Well said. There's a point here made by Joseph. The only reason the government wanted to help Native Americans is because they wanted to exploit natives by forcing them to work jobs against their will. Government wanted natives to grow crops in the Midwest.
Yeah, I think the government trying to make natives grow crops is so they can be colonized. Some natives, especially like the plains natives, where their livelihood depended on hunting the buffalo, but they wanted these natives to grow crops to domesticate natives. That's why reservations are wrong in the first place, because they kept natives in one specific area when some of us were mobile, right? And
Mhm.
I think this was part of assimilation, giving us specific, allotments of land and trying to individualize us, trying to break us away from our community. And of course, that didn't work because we're a community. We're a very strong community. Even now, I talk about how we have very a strong sense of community within our native peoples. I think it's just tactics of colonization that have failed. There was some assimilation, but I think these strong sense of communities and our cultures and languages are going to help us move forward into decolonization.
Well said. Well, Rick, can you tell everybody where can they find Decolonized Buffalo podcast, like on social media, etc., and if there's anything that you want to plug or promote?
Yeah, I'm on YouTube. I'm on Spotify and some other Apple podcasts. I have Anchor, so it goes into different places. I have an Instagram. The Instagram itself has like little story highlights, and that itself has specific episodes of that topic. It has resources of other videos. It has like links to articles and book recommendations, and I also have a share drive within the Instagram, and people can read native articles based on native issues. I think I have these things because I want people to read it from themselves, right?
Mhm.
People have to do this for themselves. I can't do it for them. The podcast is only a guide to help people look into the direction. Like I said, you have to do it for yourself. So I think this is what the podcast is for. That's why I try to find these articles, find these links to give them to people. So the Instagram, the Twitter, I have a Twitter, Decolonized Buffalo. There is YouTube and Spotify.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on, and I hope you've educated people a lot here today, because I've brought this up before, that the history that is taught to us in our school system, that is the whitewashed version of history.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Thank you so much for coming on, Rick.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
All right, guys, about to head out here. Definitely check out Decolonized Buffalo podcast, you guys. Again, like, we have to learn about the real history of this country. And I would even let you know, in reference to Black history too, what you learn about Black history in school, it is the whitewashed version of it. That includes slavery, that includes Jim Crow, um, and so on and so on. They don't want to tell you the real history, because if they did, I think you'd be livid. I think you'd be very angry. Hit that like button, guys, before we head out. That helps with the algorithm. I see Rome is here. Have a great day, Sabby. Thank you. Hi, Rome. Guys, also donate to Rome's Tour from the Poor. That's scrolling across the bottom of the screen. Always helpful there. That is one of the ways that you can help us do some of the things that are done on the ground. And then also, I need to look this up. I thought I had this in an email, but I don't think I guess I don't have it. I need to look this up as to how you can help people with the water issue also in Jackson, Mississippi. I know Rome was trying to find a way if he could get down there as well to give people clean water there. But definitely, like, this is another example. Don't donate your money to these politicians. People in Jackson, Mississippi don't have clean water. Donate your money towards organizations like that to help those people. Matter of fact, if you live pretty close to Mississippi, you're probably better off just going there in person and giving them clean water yourself. Just keeping it real. That's what we should be advocating for. That's what we should be really promoting, not give your money to another politician. I get so tired of that. It's ridiculous. So it's 6:58. If you guys want to see more Sabby, I will be live again tonight on my channel at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We're going to talk about Nick's debate that he had with Robbie on Rising. That was a really good segment. Nick did the damn thing, which I knew he would. We're going to talk about Ilhan Omar selling out, something that she did recently, which should be concerning to any of you that are, I would say, activists in reference to the police state. We're going to talk about Noam Chomsky's interview about the U.S. government, presumed interactions with the China-Taiwan situation and why we should be concerned. And we're also going to discuss, I have 4 tonight. What's the other one? Let me see. Shoot. You'd think I would remember. But, oh, yes. We're also going to talk about something that's happening in Texas with the governor race with Beto O'Rourke. It is not looking too good for him. So, yeah, check me out over there, guys. I hope you had a good time. I hope you learned a lot from Rick from Decolonized Buffalo podcast. Definitely follow them, check them out. And remember, the history that they teach you in the school system is never the full history. Have a good night, guys. Keep up the fight.